Okay, thank you. All right, we are going to have a special board meeting of the Avon Grove Charter School tonight. Today is this afternoon, actually. It's Thursday, January 28th, only a few more days till February. So we'll call the meeting to order. We do have a quorum. We'll begin with our annual or our normal Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If everyone would recite the mission statement, please, to inspire passion for lifelong learning, one student at a time. Thank you. Sarah, would you mind doing the roll call?
Yes. Dwayne Degler.
Here.
Eugene Steger. Let's see him. Stacy Barno. Rob Bernier.
Here.
Colleen Preston.
Here.
Deji Akintoy. Brian Ladman. Kristen Smith.
Here.
And Michelle McCrae.
Here.
Great. Thank you very much. All right, we're going to move on. So I'm going to turn it over to Kristen and Brian, and I know we've got Nurse Holly and Tasha, everyone on here. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
All right, well, we're going to get started. At the last board meeting, I gave you the information for rapid testing. So this rapid testing is a project called Project Acet, and it's school-based for COVID-19 testing program across 5 counties in southeastern Pennsylvania, which is where we are. The project partners are CHOP, the CCIU, and the Chester County Health Department. The purpose of it is to provide schools point of care for rapid testing as a mitigation strategy in combination with the Avon Grove Charter School Health and Safety Plan. So it aims to protect staff and students from exposure to COVID-19, limit transmission, and it provides additional information in assessing the safety of in-person instruction and extracurricular activities. Now, I will say that, you know, part of our biggest problem right now is that we are requiring tests for, and we're going to go through different situations, but we do need tests when we have people that have been exposed to COVID, or, you know, might even have vacationed or gone somewhere and need a test. And it is very difficult to get a test. And if you do get a test, it's $75, or I've even had a teacher pay $250. So this program for me is going to take the burden of teachers having to pay a cost to be able to participate in something that we can resolve quickly with a rapid test. So the rapid test is administered using a nasal swab. The testing accuracy rates for symptomatic individuals is 97, 98%. For asymptomatic and routine surveillance, it's between 65 and 70. The guidance from CHOP is to confirm unexpected results by referring individuals for a PCR COVID test. So some of the questions that the board had asked previously was just about if we're not sure. And I do have Holly, and Holly is the lead on all of this. And so she can answer a lot of these questions more scientifically and medically than I can. But you know, if there were any questions or part of protocol and a PCR test was more reliable or needed, Holly would send them for that additionally. Holly, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just so an unexpected result would be if someone presented to the nurse during the day and met all the criteria to fail a COVID screening, where we would send them home. So now, instead of sending them home and waiting 24 plus hours for test results, we can do the test right there. And if they test positive, we know we can begin our contact tracing and quarantining and things like that. If that particular person were to test negative, it would be unexpected, and we would want to have them tested with the PCR test, which is more specific and would have a higher percentage of accuracy, even though these are extremely accurate. The other thing would be if someone said, if we were just doing the surveillance testing and someone who had no symptoms tested positive, we again would want to have them tested just to make sure that we don't have someone in the building, you know, asymptomatic, but still potentially spreading COVID.
Okay. So when we have symptomatic testing, testing may include in-school close contacts of students and staff who test positive for COVID. So this would, when we talk to the Chester County Health Department, it's really about were you 6 feet, had a mask on, shields, all of these things matter for more than 15 minutes. And there has been times where the teachers or the students say, yes, I've done all of those things. And the Chester County Health Department will say, well, then you don't have to quarantine. However, we're taking that on people's word that they can remember that they did that. So this is another validation that instead of trying to get them to remember if they followed every single part of that, if they were exposed to COVID, we can just ensure that by having these tests available. So the testing strategy is not for the use of close contacts from the community. So if you're at a church party, which most of the positive cases that we have, well, all of them so far that we know of have been from outside of the community. So family parties, somebody from their immediate family is positive, kids coming home from college, churches. So there's been several different community things that have caused positive results in the school, which we would not then have outside community members or test them from outside the community. If they know they're positive, we would have them get tested outside of the school building. Holly, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I think just to support that, it would be for staff and students who with consent presented during the school day with symptoms.
Right.
So it wouldn't be, hey, can I drop by with my sister who was around someone kind of thing.
Right. And we would use them for teachers so that they can teach kids if they were alarmed or upset. I think I used myself as an example. I had a headache and wanted to be sure. So I paid the money to get the test to make sure. And obviously I was fine, but it was one of those things where that would give me peace of mind too, when somebody has something on the chart. Provide quicker identification of positive individuals, reduces the barriers for the community. Obviously, if we're all at 15 to know, or if we're at all of these community doctors' offices that are giving tests or CVS's, this is just going to give more tests to people that are out there looking for them. And then reducing the barriers for obtaining a COVID-19 test outside of school. And I just brought that up. Screening and surveillance testing, they do say we can use it for that. That would not be our first priority. Obviously, our first priority would be for the contact tracing purposes and people that are symptomatic, but we can use them for screening or surveillance. If we wanted to do some kind of extracurricular activity, we could use these tests for that as well. So the health and safety, as far as the minimum participation that we need to do this, we need approval from myself and the board. There's signatures that are required. So Dwayne, I would need to get with you so that you could sign the agreement. And this is with the memorandum of understanding that would go then to the Chester County Health Department. So we would obtain that. Then we have to obtain necessary consent from staff and parents and guardians for students who will be tested. So if there was any staff or students that were being tested by Holly would get that consent form. The consent form was sent to all the board members, and our solicitor, Stacy, who's on this call as well, approved all the documentation that the Chester County Health Department has provided for us and given us in this process. Agree with all the standing orders as issued by the Chester County Health Department. So there's, where they're going to store it and where the location of it is and how to use it. So that all has to happen as part of the agreement. The nursing staff, Holly is the main nurse and is assigned to all the COVID protocol right now. She was trained, and also another nurse, all the nurses were trained, but another nurse here at Campbellsville, Sam, they were trained to administer the test and also train others to test. So that's happened. And then we have to agree to prioritize the use of tests. So obviously we're saying we want to prioritize the symptomatic staff and students at the school or on the bus, contact tracing, and then use it for screening as we go forward if we need to. location for testing control. Holly, did you want to speak to some of these things that are going to happen for the testing?
Sure. So when we receive the tests, they come in a kit in a box, and the box contains two quality control. You want to test to run to ensure, that you have a good box of tests. There's a temperature log that gets filled out daily, and the max temperature is like 77 degrees. So it's something you want to keep kind of climate controlled, room temperature. As far as storage, it would be stored in the nurse's office, and we both have locked cabinets for those to be stored in. Disposal, the actual test card and the nasal swab have to be disposed as, it's called red bag trash or medical waste. What we can do here is we both have sharps containers, and those are appropriate to use for the waste. That will save us money, because it is to have medical waste or red bag waste, it is expensive, and you have to have a separate contract and things like that. So our sharps containers are completely appropriate to dispose of any of the testing supplies. And then the consent forms were provided to us through CHOP. So those are documents that have already been vetted by physicians and community partners and things like that.
And then we talked about all the approval process that the documentation has been through. So that's really it. So this is part of the process for us to get the testing here on site. I did talk to the Chester County Health Department today. I also spoke to Renaissance Charter, who actually just did this. And I asked how many tests they got from the health department. And they provided at least one, and then an additional one for each person that, for the staff members that were at the school. So I don't have an exact number of tests, but it sounds like they'll at least supply us with the number of teachers that we have and an extra. So we'll go from the first supply, and then we'll see how it goes. And I'll report out at the board meetings how it's going, and how many we've used as we go through this process, if the board approves this today. If not, we can go from there. But do you have any questions for Nurse Holly, since she's been through the training and can answer them for you?
Yeah, if you have questions, we'll raise our hand and go around like normal. I just have a couple real quick. And I think you answered them. These tests are for students and staff only, correct?
Correct.
And you're only using them if they present some kind of symptom. It's not like you answered, right? And I assume, and it's a pretty simple question, but I just want to ask, if a parent decides not to give any consent, we stick to our normal policy. If they present, they're going right home, and they have to follow our normal protocol of you get a test or present symptom-free or et cetera, correct?
Right. So if a child would fail the COVID screening during the school day, and either we didn't have the test or the parent didn't want the test administered, we would go with the 10 days from symptom onset, or return with a negative COVID test.
Okay. And my last question is, well, there's two. If student X presents and you're going to give them the test, you have the form, do you still reach out to that parent ahead of time, or are you just, you have the consent, you're going to do the test and let them know after?
It's not that urgent where I couldn't take the time to call. I think that would be the best thing to do. Yeah. The other thing that we didn't really talk about is the test results are reported through an app. It's called PA Rapid Test. And once we fill in the patient's information, if it were an adult, we can scan the back of their driver's license, and it will auto-populate their address and date of birth, things like that. Then when the results are recorded, the data is encrypted and sent to the Chester County Health Department and the Pennsylvania Department of Health. So that's another reason to let the parents know and for consent.
Cool. And are these coming in? I know Rob will ask, is there any cost for these, or are these being provided for free? That's great.
Yeah, no, these are all being provided through the Project Acet program.
Good. All right, so I will look to everyone else on here. Oops, I think he's beeping. Does anyone have any questions? Just give me a hands up. and I will call on you. It helps if I say Colleen before I mute. So Colleen, go ahead.
But that reminded me to unmute.
Mhm.
Okay, I guess I'm concerned mainly with the whole thing, I guess, makes me a bit nervous. I'm concerned, like Dwayne, your understanding, I think what you just repeated is that it's only going to be used for symptomatic, but that's definitely not I think right now that's the main plan, but everything says it can be used as a screening tool too. And I think, Kristen, you sort of indicated that maybe it would be used that way. I guess I have a couple of concerns. Partly, COVID is so bad because that asymptomatic period. And there's this huge scope of symptoms, and the symptoms are all the same for anything. You know what I mean? It's a cold symptom. So I understand that they're saying the accuracy is fairly high, but for a symptomatic person. But what scope of symptoms? Like is that for somebody that's super, super sick? Or because we know that, well, I think we know, is that in the younger kids especially, there's a lot more asymptomatic or just a tiny bit of symptoms. And so are those numbers still true, that it is as accurate in these cases where it's just a cough or it's just a sniffle or whatever? Because it doesn't always have to be these symptoms that are really bad. I guess my other concern would be the use of it. I get its helpfulness as a screening tool. I'm just concerned that a negative would be used then, and then if a negative is obtained too soon, then it's not really any good. You know what I mean? Like if you're using it within the close contacts to see if somebody who had a contact is positive, what the CDC says and what everybody sort of says is if it's not been a certain number of days, then it's not an accurate test. And so we can't use it for a close contact and say they had a negative, they're fine, they can teach, because if it was only the day before, it's not enough days. I think if I understand correctly. So
Yeah.
those are, I guess, my two main concerns that these I don't love is it's the rapid part, I guess, that sort of makes me nervous, is that they're not as accurate in these certain situations. And so then they're not they're not as good for us. You know what I mean? Like concerned that there would be somebody who it was used and they got a negative, but then they turn out positive later. Cause everybody, like I know people that have had that, you know what I mean? That had a negative rapid and then 3 days later had a positive PCR. And then that symptomatic thing, that scope of the symptoms, is it really accurate at 65 or 70% on asymptomatic people? And what's the range for symptoms that are super, super mild? Is it closer to the 65 or 70, or is it 97, 98? Those are.
So I'm gonna let Holly answer that question, but I am going to say that Holly, myself, and Tasha are the COVID team, and we've been doing this with every case that you see on that dashboard. And that 5-day thing is a real thing. I'm telling you, everybody who had the close contact, if they were positive from a person outside of school, in whatever it is,
Yep.
Day 5, right on, is when those symptoms start. And so what happens is people get anxious. They hear they were with a positive person, they get anxious and they run out and they go get a test and they don't wait. That is a true, we have seen it time and time again, that day 5 is really important.
Yep.
So I want to start off by saying that, Holly is really educated about all of that. And along the way, everything that she has learned through this process is exactly what ends up happening. And we've seen the data in that. So I'm going to let you answer that, Holly.
So as far as concerns over mild symptoms versus severe symptoms, the test is going to actually measure viral load in the nasal cavity.
Mhm.
No matter whether your symptoms are mild or severe, if through our nursing assessment, we determine that you are a COVID screening failure and we have consent to do the test and we do it, it's based on the viral load that you're carrying. And according to everything we've learned from the CDC, as far as when you're symptomatic, when you are positive with COVID, you have enough of a viral load 48 hours prior to your symptoms starting. So if you are symptomatic, you should have enough of a viral load for that test to be positive. It's that sensitive. And even though once we have a positive test for person A, we have the ability to start their isolation and start contact tracing. And even though we can't, or we should not, because it's not appropriate, test any of the close contacts before day 5, we can still get them home, get them starting to quarantine, have them start to watch for symptoms, and then get tested if their symptoms were to develop.
I guess that's what you just said is sort of key to me, that there's still, that close contact people are still going to be quarantined. That's my concern, is that we can't use it. You can't use you can't use a PCR or a rapid to sort of end that quarantine early before it's been enough days. It's just not.
We don't allow testing out of quarantine. We didn't adopt that policy just because that's not, even though the chances of turning positive after like 10 days or 12 days or having a negative test on day 5, the percentages are like 5 to 12%. I don't feel like it's worth it to take that risk. So we stick with the 14-day quarantine for everybody who's been exposed and identified as person B.
Holly, give them some examples of some of the things we've seen where we would use this.
So I had a student prior to Christmas who came in and complaining of a headache, and, you know, kind of a combination of nurses' intuition, mom's intuition. I just knew something was going on. So headache, fever, again, enough to constitute a COVID screening failure. Sent him home, suggested the test, came back positive. So something like that is benign as I have a headache coupled with a fever was enough of a red flag right now for me to suggest the test, which enabled us to then start to contact trace. But unfortunately, in that case, it was a matter of 4 days before the test results came back. So that was 4 days of any potential contact still being in the building. And at that point, 4 days later, if they were going to become symptomatic, they would have been in their infectious period.
And I know, like, I can think of one staff member who posed just sinus. And when she went to the nurse, she said, I just have a runny nose. I get this time of year. And based on the chart of what she was saying to the nurse, it was like, okay, you have allergies. And she went back to her day. Well, the next day, by the end of the afternoon, she couldn't taste or smell. And that was like ring a ding ding. Like that's like the big one. And if we would have had that COVID test, she could have done that out of caution and maybe found out the day before she came back and didn't get that. Because, you know, you have to have 2 certain symptoms. And sometimes when they communicate to us, they don't communicate accurately everything, or they just have a runny nose and they don't have anything else.
Mm-hmm. And I'm finding that loss of taste and smell is no longer an immediate symptom. People aren't just waking up and not having taste and smell. I mean, it's days later.
And the runny nose one, I mean, that people have runny noses, and you're not going to send everybody home that has a runny nose, but some of these cases only have runny noses as a symptom.
And I think the other thing that's important to look at is the incidence rate in the communities around us. I mean, right now, the incidence rate everywhere is in the 7%. So back in like November, a lot of the places were 3 to 5%. So maybe when your incidence rate is 3 to 5%, you're not as hyper aware of anybody walking in with a headache or a sore throat. But now, I think with the higher incidence rates, we have to assume that everybody's COVID positive until we can find out that they're not.
Now you mentioned the asymptomatic, just routine screening, using these tests for routine asymptomatic people. The intention of these tests were at first to test all of your staff every week, right? And we don't have the manpower, nor do we believe we're going to get the amount of tests to do that as a weekly precautionary type of thing. If you have a really small staff, that might be what you do. But we don't have that kind of manpower, nor do we have, I don't think we're going to have the amount of tests. And if we do 2 weeks, what's the sense? Like, what's the sense of that? So, for what I was saying, it says we can use it for that, for routine. And I know that, maybe if we have extra tests and we're looking at spring sports and we say, before you start, you need a test. There's ways. I didn't want to limit ourselves to say we're never going to use it in that case, because in that protocol, it says you can. Some schools are using it strictly for that. That was not our intention. I just can't. The only reason I wanted to pursue this as one of the things that we do is because I'm struggling watching staff pay $75 every time they have to go get a test. And I have one staff member who doesn't have benefits, who is part-time, and she just keeps getting hit as the quarantine person for whatever reason. And she had to pay $250 for a test. That to me, like, it's just, I don't even know how if we can have access to free testing, to let our educators pay anything for tests is crazy to me. In Bucks County, they have 4 places that are just for teachers to go to and get a test. So we don't have anything like that. And they've kind of let us this be our thing to do it ourselves. I wish there were 4 places that I could send just teachers to, and no just teachers go there or students, but it's just not here in Chester County. And even in Bucks County where they do that, you actually have to show your ID. Like, I tried to go there over the winter break and they wouldn't let me without you have to have a Bucks County teacher ID.
Thank you, Kristen and Nurse Holly. Does anyone else on the board have some questions? Michelle McRae.
Yes, I'm just a little concerned that it could cause a bit of false security for someone. So say the teacher, for example, a staff member has a sore throat on Monday, they look back and they're like, yeah, I did drop off something at my buddy's house and loitered a little bit. The test comes back negative. So then they think, oh, they're good to go. And then it still hurts a little bit the next day and the next day, but they don't get tested. Now, is there any follow-up in those situations or any checking in, like, oh, you are negative? Are you feeling better? Or I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
So I would, in the process of just, our nursing assessment, would kind of ask questions like that. Do you think you've been exposed to anyone? Do you have any suspected or known exposure to someone who was COVID positive? Were you at any large gatherings recently? Were you within 6 feet of people without a mask on? Things like that, to try to get a gauge. And again, taking into the community incidence rate also. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely reasonable and easy enough to follow up with staff on how they're feeling. I mean, I do that all the time,
So I think you have 2 different kinds of staff members right now. The ones that are overly cautious and will come and say, I have a runny nose. And then you have the staff that will be, I have allergies. I've self-diagnosed myself and will continue to self-diagnose until somebody says to them, you better go to the nurse's office. I don't think you look right. So I think regardless of whether we have tests, we're going to always have those 2 staff members that are overly cautious or not cautious at all, and somebody's making them go to the nurse. So that might be a concern for them, but that's a concern for me, in that I do have that, and it gives Holly another tool by when that person says, I'm fine, there's nothing wrong with me, that I at least could do that. Because if not now, they don't go get a test. They might not be exactly fitting the criteria to go get a test. And so we let them go back to school and they could have been positive, right? So it validates Holly so that they have to, because they might not have fit that chart, but it gives us the peace of mind.
Thank you. Michelle, was that good?
Yeah, that answers my question. I just want to make sure that it's not, setting the bar too low, that, there's still a lot of extra, levels of precaution and maybe even more now, because I could see it. I have concerns that it does create the potential incentive for a parent who thinks, oh, my kid just has a little bit of sore throat or just a tiny little cough, but I'm still going to send them in, because if they're worried at school, they'll give her a test. So it's still, I just don't want people to kind of feel a little bit more secure that it's going to be caught when, and letting their guard down a little bit.
Right.
I hear that.
Yeah.
And go ahead, Holly.
No, I was just going to say, unfortunately, historically, kids are sent to school sick. Here's some Advil, here's some Tylenol, try to make it through the day. And, they show up at 10:30 when the meds have worn off with a fever. But yeah, it would not be fair to then put that burden of testing and diagnosing on the school.
Now I know at one point we had talked about it just being used for staff and not for students. Do you have any feeling on that particularly?
I personally feel like it's just as important. I think
For the contact tracing?
I do think for the contact tracing, we have to take into consideration bus rides, especially if kids are changing classes, things like that. Of course, you can't, if parents were opposed to it, then we just return to our sick child policy. But again, we're potentially saving days worth of exposed individuals walking around the school unknowingly.
I do think we're overly cautious. Even when people started loosening the 10 days versus the 14 days, we consistently said, no, we're going to do the 14 days. So we're overly cautious about making sure people stay home when they stay home the time that's been recommended since the beginning. We're not giving any leeway. We didn't bring sports back when other people did, because we want kids in school. I think at this point, it's one of those things where it is several days sometimes before you get testing back. And when a kid has strep throat and people are waiting 5 days to get that is difficult for us. Especially when, some of the symptoms, like I said, are just runny noses.
Thank you both. Anyone else? Stacy or Kristen or Rob or Deji? Rob, you have a question?
Yes. So what are we going to do about the opt-out populations? Are they just going to follow the guidelines you have currently in place?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they would just be a COVID screening failure, and then, either test on their own and present with a negative test or be out for the 10 days from when their symptoms started.
Okay. Just want to make sure that's covered.
Yep.
And Holly, just, I know the answer, but just to confirm. So if someone does come in and you have a concern and you give a test and it's a negative and you still have a concern, you're still going to follow the same policy and say, you know what, I need you to go home just to make sure. Perfect. Thank you.
Because that would be an unanticipated result based on CHOP's guidance. So yeah, they're going to be referred out for a PCR test.
Perfect.
Or again, out for the 10 days.
Right. Yep. Okay. Anyone else on the board have a question? Michelle, go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up on what Holly said, because I felt that was really important. Can you just talk a little bit more about that? Because I think that does address a lot of the concerns. Mm-hmm. So if it doesn't seem right, or you still see something going on, it's not definitive, these tests. Is that correct?
Not definitive, highly accurate. like well over 90% accuracy. But again, unfortunately, and I've been saying this, no one can just be sick anymore. Everyone has to have COVID, even if they don't. So I think it's good to have this level of screening where we say, okay, this test is negative. However, you are still sick. There's something wrong with you. And regardless, you shouldn't be in school when you're contagious. So it gets them to the doctor, which, you know, a lot of doctors these days are not seeing even well patients. They're not seeing well patients. They're not doing immunizations like they should. So at least they can say, I was at school, I had a negative COVID screening, but I have a fever and a sore throat. You know, can I get a strep test? Or I have body aches and a fever. Can I get tested for the flu? So it's just one box they can check off and hopefully give that information to their doctor to have them seen.
Thanks for speaking to that. I appreciate it.
Great, thank you. All right. Again, I'm going to just make sure Kristen Smith, Stacy Barno, Deji, do either of you have a question? I can't speak this afternoon. It's too early. No. Okay. So, Kristen, I guess at this point, you would be looking for the board to make a decision to vote if we should allow this to go forward. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So unless there are any other questions, and I don't want to belabor the point, but I just want to make sure the questions are answered. If there isn't any questions, is there a motion on the floor concerning these policies, either for or against? And there's silence.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay, so there's a motion on the floor for approval of these guidelines to administer the test from Kristen Smith. Is there a second?
Dwayne, Stacy Barno, I'll second.
Okay. So then, Sarah, we'll go through a roll call vote if you don't mind.
Wayne, it sounds like Stacy wants to say something. Hold on one second.
Oh, I'm sorry, Stacy Fuller. Go ahead.
Okay, Dwayne. I noticed that underlying all of this is an MO, what do they call, a memorandum of agreement between the health department and Avon Grove Charter School. That provides the legal foundation for this whole testing process. So you can move forward with the motion that's been made, or perhaps amend it to just approve the memorandum of agreement, allowing this process to move forward. And that can be what you formally approve. Is that right, Kristen? Yep,
I wrote it right. I wrote it in the box, the memorandum of understanding or of agreement. You see it with the Chester County IU in the subject.
Yeah.
So it's approving that.
All right. So I apologize. So
that's okay.
Kristen Smith, would you like to make that a motion to approve the memorandum of agreement for the Chester County Health Department?
I will keep my motion on the table.
Yes. And Stacy, you're seconding that change?
Yes, I'll still second, please.
Okay. All right. So let's try this one last time. Thank you, Stacy. I appreciate that. Sarah, do you want to go through the roll call vote?
Yes, sure. Dwayne Degler.
Approve.
And then Eugene's on here. Stacy Barno.
Approve.
Rob Bernier.
Approved.
Colleen Preston.
Approve.
Deji Akintoy.
Approve.
Brian's on here. Kristen Smith.
Approve.
And Michelle McCrae.
Approve.
All right. It's unanimous. There we go. I don't think there's anything else. Is there anything else?
Nope.
Okay.
That's it.
All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Dwayne, I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting. Stacy Barno.
Second.
I'll second. Kristen Smith.
All in favor, raise your hand. It's unanimous, except for Deji, and I'm assuming he's raising his hand.
My hand is raised.
There you go. All right, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Great night.
Appreciate
Thank you.
it.
Thank you.
Great job. Thank you.